Yeah, let's talk about that for a little bit. What's going on with the lawsuit? Obviously, you're not going to be the only ones challenging, but I'm interested to hear, and I'm sure the audience is interested to hear more about what you guys are doing in particular.
Sure. I don't want to pretend to be like the tip of the spear on this. I know GOA is planning a really big one. And I know JSD will be a plaintiff in a lawsuit. And so a lot of people are working on it. Obviously, FBC, I think, will get involved. But what if it may seem that some of these groups are slow to action, but the problem here is that we didn't know what to expect from the final rule, and so the draft litigation has to now be adapted to the final text of the rule, and to be done in a considered way. Like, this will take some weeks to adapt these drafts to the final text. So I expect our litigation to be some weeks out, and I think it'll be the same way with GOA. But that's kind of okay. ATF gave everybody like 120 days, which is quite generous if you think about it. That's on the long side for APA regs. So we've got a lot of time to put things together. And I think there's still aspects of the rule which are underappreciated. Footnotes which have gone unexamined, adoption of standards from court decisions, and things that ATF has kind of snuck in here, to where even on the surface, like in our podcast here today, if we say, well, one or two of these things like aren't that bad and it could be worse, there might still be some really bad poisonous things in here which we haven't yet really understood.
What is it, I guess, in broad strokes, that you think is most egregious in this rule to the point where you're filing this suit over it?
Well, I don't want to overstate. There may be multiple plaintiffs, let's say, in my litigation. Mm-hmm. So I can speak from direct experience. I can tell you what I don't like about the rule, but I don't want to characterize the litigation, let's say.
Sure.
There's a lot of stuff in the 180s in the rule that I don't like, where ATF talks about structuring transactions, and they say like, fine, 80% will continue, and jigs and other components will continue, but if you sell to the same customer in the same universe or something, somehow you've sold them a firearm across time. I don't like that. I don't think that's not very compelling to me, and is a torturous kind of stretch of the definition of a firearm. Multiple components over time to one customer. You sold them a firearm. I don't like that. I think that's worth fighting. And then, of course, there's these noxious threats about regulating CAD and CAM files, which is completely outside of the scope of the GCA and the NFA. And ATF still feels the need to put some comment in there that, well, we could get people on conspiracy if they give people files for 3D printed guns. Politely, fuck yourself.
And so I think it's the first time someone has cursed on the podcast. Usually we're always doing
it's deserved. See, they're pretending that there's all this good faith in here. This is not a good faith rule. We know why this rule was pushed. It was pushed to regulate the legal private manufacture of firearms, which is and remains legal in this country. And so they want to put a cloud over the activity, pretend that it affects public safety, when it does not. It is almost an infinitely zero part of the public safety problem currently in America. And then they want to give the president credit for solving gun crime or any type of gun control when he doesn't have the political power to otherwise do so.
Well, obviously the ATF put in there some statistics about recovered firearms. They claim that I believe it's been a 10-fold increase in recovering unserialized firearms. Although they don't break down the difference between
exactly.
Privately made guns and guns that have had their serial numbers scratched off.
They spend hundreds of pages talking about PMFs, privately made firearms, and then do not disclose the actual statistics of so-called PMFs. They just mention firearms without serial numbers. We know the vast majority of firearms without serial numbers have been firearms which have had their serial numbers removed or destroyed, which is already itself a federal crime. Crime guns exist in their own parallel universe to legal guns in this world and circulate for years. So this is an attempt at conflation, and even they understand that statistically the problem is irrelevant at the moment. And they even say in the rule, well, we don't even need it to be relevant to act because we're sovereign. Well, fine. Then why did you go to the effort?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's still, even with those numbers not being broken out, it remains a relatively small percentage of overall crime guns, clearly. But do you discount the idea that there have been more privately made guns showing up in crimes as they claimed? Or?
I don't. Of course, more is always a relative term. More compared to what? Mm-hmm. More compared to zero. Like 5 years ago, no one was making polymer 80s. I agree. Now polymer 80s have become, quite a problem for certain gang task forces and other places, in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. A target, no doubt. But this rule is meant clearly from the top down to affect the polymer 80 kit more than anything else. Right. If you had a question about what was banned in this rule the other day, well, it's the thing the president held up. If it's anything, it's the polymer 80 kit. So we know
what is it? Buy builds. What do they call it?
Yeah, there's the buy build shoot kit.
Yeah, there it is.
That
Buy,
was
build,
out a
shoot.
year ago. But even so, they want to regulate not just whole firearm kits or what they call complete weapons kits. They want to regulate receiver kits, and that's what you were talking about. So they're clearly saying, fine, if you're going to sell an 80, maybe, but if you include almost anything else with it, we might call that a receiver kit, which itself is now considered a firearm under the GCA. Again, I don't like it, and I think it's worth fighting.
So in your view, it's not, you don't view it as a legitimate attempt to reduce gun crime in the United States. You think it's more of an attempt to control private manufacture of firearms by regular Americans.
Yeah, I think it's an attempt to put a ceiling in on so-called private manufacturers, and what was clearly going to be like the explosion of that activity. The kits were becoming very popular. 3D printing is becoming very popular. And in a kind of irony here, if you're going to ban receiver kits or partially complete receivers, what you're actually incentivizing that market to do now is actually figure out how to complete the readily convertible components from raw material. So you're kind of teaching people or incentivizing people to learn even more about how to make a gun, which probably will create a larger black market.
Right, which you guys have actually already figured out to a certain extent with the 0% project that you had with the Ghost Gunner, right?
I think we've got a good start with so-called 0% receivers. I was preparing for a rule which would say, all 80% receivers are done. And, I was thinking, well, the only way forward then is 3D printing and 0%. It seems that that's not completely the case. Although now we can see how this action is proceeding, let's say at the state level in a harder direction. Because many states, like New York, for example, just in something like 10 or 12 days, will ban so-called unfinished receivers in a way that this rule did not. And so like in New York, Maryland, these other states, now the only way you can keep going is with 3D printers or so-called 0% receivers. So we'll continue to teach people how to do that with rifles. I think we have a cool pistol concept, and I think other people will kind of imitate that in the years to come.